Well, good evening, Cedar Falls. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, March 20th, 2023. I'll now call this meeting to order with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer.
Here.
Cruz.
Here.
Harding.
Here.
Canfield.
Here.
Sires.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
All members present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I'd ask for those who desire and are able to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item on the agenda tonight is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve regular meeting of March 6th?
So moved. Second.
Moved and second. Any discussion from council? Any from the public? Okay. So motion and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that does pass. And Madam Clerk, do we have any agenda revisions tonight?
I have no agenda revisions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have no special presentations tonight, so that'll take us right forward to a public forum where speakers will have one opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on topics relevant to city business. If anyone wishes to speak on something that's going to occur in the agenda, I would just ask that you please wait until that time so it's all recorded together for posterity's sake. But if you'd like to speak now, this is your time, and you have up to 5 minutes. So does anyone wish to speak in public comment tonight? Yes, come forward, ma'am. Name and address for the record. Oh.
Good evening and welcome the sunshine outside. So I'm here to read the Courier to you again in case you don't get it. I read it, I think, the last time. This one is single speed settles alleged ADA violations. The reason I bring that is still trying to get restrooms. And by the way, I just visited your restrooms here. They are beautiful. If we could take those restrooms right out of City Hall and build a building around it, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Okay, Waterloo. A Waterloo brewery has settled alleged Americans with Disabilities Act violations with the federal government. I'm going to skip some stuff. Location 323 Commercial Street in downtown, that's Waterloo, wasn't compliant with ADA's accessibility requirements for public accommodations. We hope others will continue to take their ADA obligations seriously as our office remains committed to ensuring that individuals with disabilities have full and equal access to places of public accommodation in the Northern District of Iowa. In addition, the brewery agreed to a number of additional alterations to its dining areas. So far, that's not what I'm worried about. Let's see, entrances and restrooms to come into compliance with ADA accessibility standards. Under federal law, private entities that own or operate places of public accommodation, including restaurants and bars, are prohibited from discriminating on the basis of disability. The ADA authorities, the U.S. authorizes the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate complaints and undertake reviews of compliance of covered entities. The Justice Department is also authorized to commence a civil lawsuit in federal court in any case that involves a pattern or practice of discrimination or raises an issue of general public importance and to seek injunctive relief and monetary damages and civil penalties. I know this is talking not about businesses or talking about the city, but if you are looking and trying to improve your community by providing restrooms that are people who have disabilities are able to get in. As I said before, my husband has a walker, and these are perfect bathrooms. They're just grand. You can get in. It has baby changer areas. It has everything a family needs to come and be comfortable with whatever they need to be taken care of, and to say that this city really cares about the people who visit it and the people who live here. And with the amount of money we spend on other things to attract people, I just as soon spend a little to attract them to really nice restrooms. So I thank you again. I'll probably be back again, hopefully. I don't know if anybody up here cares, because I don't hear from anybody anywhere. I seem to be the lone person in Cedar Falls who needs a bathroom. But that's the nature of the game. So thank you for listening again. I enjoy seeing you once a week, or once every other week. Good evening.
Thank you, Rosemary. You always appreciate your comments. Does anyone else wish to speak in public forum tonight? Yes, ma'am. Just name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Kathy DeLaw. I reside at 2214 Coventry Lane. My property is east of Ruth Walker, 2208 Coventry Lane, that it was addressed at the March 6th meeting. As immediate neighbors to her, we are so concerned about our community safety. We have appreciated the steps that the city has taken, Jamie and Adam. They have identified the interior hazards. We thought the raccoons and unkept exterior was bad, but now it's like, okay, we have an interior fire hazard, we have unsanitary conditions, and it's just much more unrest than we thought we had on the block. I understand that Ruth Walker has communicated to the city today that she has a contract to buy her property. That's great news if it actually happens. Who's to say this contract exists, or if it will be followed through? Buyers renege. Ruth Walker has not been receptive to any offers of help from our neighbors. Since I moved in 2007, we've all tried to help her, and she's yelled at some of us, she's ignored us. It's just been that way all along. She's a repeat offender of multiple city codes for over 10 years. It's pertinent to have an alternative, viable plan at this stage. She continues to defy city's orders by entering unsafe property. She's there right now. As of today, she continues to occupy the premises. There's a sign that says unlawful to enter premises on the doors. She is still coming and going. The only change has been at night. She used her trash cart for the first time in 24 years since
Ma'am,
the meeting. I'm sorry.
I'm a little concerned. I'll ask for council's thoughts on this as well. I want to be careful not to get into just public shaming of a person.
I'm not trying to do that.
I'm telling you as a presiding officer, that's what's happening here.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's not what I want to
Okay.
project. What I want to project is that it's not safe for us. The fire department at this point will only protect, what they told me is that it's a hazard for our employees to go into her house if a fire happened. We don't know if the what do you call those, space heaters are still running. I don't know if you remember, but when they were in there, they were sparking, they were still on. She was not home. She's continuing to go in there. It's a hazard for us, a fire hazard. That's what I'm worried about. There is not a plan that the city has received as of today, which is part of what was agreed upon. I don't mean to shame her. She needs help. I just think that there should be a viable plan submitted immediately, and I really feel that the electricity needs to be turned off. Why, of all the utilities, that's the only utility she has. She shouldn't be in there. If the debris is removed, it's like an inferno in there, and the wires inspected, fine, that'd be fine, but it is not safe for any of us on our block, and I don't mean to shame her at all. I'm not that type of person.
Okay.
But something needs to be done immediately. Do you have anything else to say? My neighbors came as support too. We're all concerned. Any feedback?
Hello, my name's Forrest Dawkins. I live on Yorkshire Drive, so her property's right behind my property.
Hey,
And so
Mr. Dawkins?
It's good to see you. This is my first time coming to a meeting and being in here, so good job. Thank you for your service. I just want to voice my support for my neighbors. It is a dangerous, when I saw the video from the last meeting and was very concerned for my neighbor. She, it seemed, yeah, she's gone through a lot of things in her own life, and so it is dangerous not only for us, but of course for her. And so we just really want hope that the city will stick to what they asked for, and if they don't get what they asked for, just to keep going through the process. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. And just as a question for staff, as a reminder for that viable plan, what was the due date for that?
Ms. Castle is here. She can answer that, but the due date was today.
And what have we
And she's been in communication with Ms. Walker and received a copy of the contract to purchase the property.
I have been in communication with not only Ms. Walker, but also the person that's interested in purchasing the property. We have discussed the major issues. It looks like the property owner is aware of what needs to be done, and the person who are interested in purchasing it is also aware of what the city is concerned about with that property and what steps they would have to take to repair it. We did ask that even if she's selling it on contract or with a contract that's not going to be probably closed until May, that the raccoons are dealt with immediately, and I have been guaranteed that that's going to happen and that the space heaters are removed. She did tell me that those were removed, and the person buying the property also informed me that he did see that they were removed. And she also has another place that she is moving into, so hopefully that concern will be gone too. This was at the very end of the day that we just spoke, and I did ask her to provide me with some additional information about their timeline to have the raccoons removed and it be boarded up so that the raccoons cannot re-enter. So I'm waiting on that information, but we have had some good communication this afternoon.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Castle. Does anyone else wish to speak for public comment tonight or public forum? All right, seeing none, then we'll close public forum for tonight and bring us over to staff updates. Mr. Gaines, do you have anything you'd like to give to the public today?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you'd allow it, I'd like to have Jennifer Rodenbeck kind of give us a brief update on where we are with our budget process. So.
Certainly, Director Rodenbeck.
Sure. So, as you're aware, we were hoping to have our public hearing tonight on our max levy. We had sent the publication over to the Courier to be published, I believe on the 8th to meet our deadline. And unfortunately, they did not publish it that day. Our clerk's office noticed that, reached out to the Courier. They assured us they would publish it the next day, and it wasn't published again. So at that point, they were gracious enough to give us a letter saying it was their fault. Unfortunately, in our communications with Iowa Department of Revenue, or Iowa Department of Management, they informed us we would not be allowed to continue with our process since we didn't meet our publication deadline. So, unfortunately, again, we were going to come here tonight and hopefully have our public hearing, but unfortunately now it's been delayed. So, we will plan on having that hearing on the max levy on April 3rd, and then we would have to have our budget adoption hearing on April 17th. So, unfortunately, we're probably going to be in kind of a condensed timeline now for our budget to get it done, but to just kind of want to give you an update since people were probably maybe expecting to talk about the budget tonight.
And we would look for council likely to, if there are questions about the budget or if there are issues on the 17th, of having special meetings until we resolve those so we can pass that. So we wouldn't look to just try to push it through in one night if there are questions, but just be aware and keep your calendar available for that time. I appreciate it. Anything else, Mr. Gaines? Then that moves us on to special order of business, where tonight item number 2 is a public hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to Planning and Zoning Commission review of site plans in the Downtown Character District. Is there a motion to receive and file proof of publication?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that does pass. And do we have any written communications filed, Madam Clerk?
I have no written communications on file, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, ma'am. For staff comments, we have Karen Howard to speak tonight. So, Ms. Howard, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. We have several zoning code text amendments tonight. I'll go through each one of those as we have the hearings. The first one on the agenda is a petition by the City Council to the Planning and Zoning Commission. As you recall, in early 2022, the City Council petitioned the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider requiring development in the downtown to be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, similar to what it was previously in the Central Business District overlay. On June 8th, after consideration of various options, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended requiring new buildings in the Urban General 2, and the storefront areas in the downtown core to be reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and approved by City Council. So that was the change that they recommended at that time. On July 18th, then the council did hold a public hearing. And at that hearing, after the hearing, they referred the ordinance back to the commission, as you recall, to also include some additional amendments that would require any plan for expanding the floor area of an existing building or any plan for one or more additional dwelling units in a project to also be reviewed through P&Z and council. On August 24th, the commission did consider that referral and recommended disapproval of that petition to include those additional review items. P&Z, the minutes were in your staff, in the staff report. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but not to just summarize P&Z, they were concerned about unduly delaying small improvement projects, and several noted that the goal of the new code was to help streamline the development review process, and they felt like their original proposal for the new site plans for new buildings downtown was a good starting place for that. So with that, just a reminder of where these code amendments would apply if this ordinance was adopted. The storefront, Urban General and Urban General 2 on this map are the orange, the red, and the yellow areas, the immediate downtown core, the area along First Street, and then there's a small commercial area that's down near 18th Street that's also in that Urban General location. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Howard. Before having the council discussion, does anyone wish to speak in public comment in this public hearing? Seeing none, then I'll consider the public hearing closed. And if council will indulge me for item 2E, I believe there's a Scrivener's error in there where it says procedures for planning and zoning commission review. It also incorporates city council approval. So I would ask if council would indulge me to have that read as pass an ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to establishing procedures for Planning and Zoning Commission review and City Council approval of site plans in the Downtown Character District upon its first consideration. For council, any concerns about having it read that way?
No.
I just want to make it clear since that's what it is. So with that, is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Open for council questions and discussion to staff. Councilor DeVere.
Just for clarity then, to vote yes on this, you're basically returning it to the overlay requirements requiring new, expanded, and dwelling units to all have P&Z review. Correct?
Could you repeat that question again?
Voting yes on this then is putting it kind of back like it was before with the overlay, where it's going to require new buildings, expansions or additions to buildings, and dwelling units to all be P&Z review. Correct?
Right. It probably is not exactly like it was before, but pretty much.
It's returning a lot of the prior requirements.
Right. That's right.
Okay,
Mayor.
yes, Councilor Cruz.
From what I recall, we're combining a couple referrals together here, that the expanding retail space and adding residential units, I did that as a separate referral because I felt that was a separate component, but it appears like you're putting them together here now.
No, I think the referral was to any expansion in floor area, I think is what the referral was, or any additional dwelling units.
Residential units.
So in the ordinance, you'll see the language. There's two separate items there that basically says any new building, and then any building adding any floor area expansion, and then any project that includes additional dwelling units.
Mm-hmm. because my concern was when you had a very small structure downtown in those areas that you circled, and it appeared that there was a loophole that a developer could take a small structure and add extensive stories of residential and not have review. Because if we don't have 5 yes votes for this, then the zoning review board decides what gets built without any transparency to the public, correct?
So it is a site plan review, and it is administrative, and they have to meet all the requirements in the code. It's a public record when they make their application, but there wouldn't be any planning and zoning commission or city council review.
But the zoning review board would review this internally, right?
Yes, it's an administrative review.
Okay. If we vote yes for this, then we remove the zoning review board from the equation, correct?
Well, no, it would still go through staff review. All site plans still go through staff review, and then we would be reporting then to the Planning and Zoning Commission with a staff report, just like we have done previously.
So, yes, there's the plan check and whatever terminology you use for CFU and all the components, staff review, but the zoning review board would not then exist if we vote yes for this. You'd have full transparency for the public to see what's going on. All the other merchants downtown can see what's going on to know if they're getting crowded or not crowded and all these components if we vote yes for this.
So there may be certain projects that still would be reviewed through that process, but it's all the same staff that's reviewing those projects. So the zoning review committee was set aside as being something that would review projects in the downtown character district because that was a new code. It goes through the same staff review through tech review.
Right. I think it's a little tomato here, but the intent of this is so that we still have transparency to the public so that a merchant or some building owner downtown doesn't all of a sudden see a big property being built that's cannibalizing parking or whether it's parked or underparked by perception or by reality. I still get plenty of people complaining about lack of parking downtown. So I want to make sure, if I understand the way we vote here, that we will bring back the way it was before we adopted form-based zoning, that planning and zoning would have a public discussion over this that people could watch, read minutes, and see.
Yes,
Yes or no?
That's what this
Okay.
ordinance is about.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Howard?
I guess, so 4 stories in that urban general one. What was it's been a while since I've read the zoning exact setbacks and everything. What's the biggest building that could be built down there currently under the zoning, under what we're in now?
The new code established a 4-story height limit downtown.
That's what I thought. So if someone added to their property and added 2 stories, that would trigger a review to follow the new ordinance anyway, because you would be changing the majority or a large portion of your property, correct?
No.
If it's an existing building and they're just expanding the floor area, it would not necessarily trigger the way it is currently. It's an administrative review.
What's the percentage that you have to change on a current building to have to fall under the new ordinance?
Oh, you still all have to follow under the new ordinance.
I guess that was my point.
Yes,
was
the
that
new
you would
ordinance
still,
applies.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of who reviews
Yeah.
whether it needs to be reviewed at P&Z and council.
So I have then, all right, thank you. That answers those questions. I would have a legal question for Kevin Rogers. So if we add back in the planning and zoning aspect and the approval by council, what legal issues would we have if the developer checks off all the boxes and council says, no, you can't do it? Does that open us up for legal, like, what does that do? How does that even work?
As long as P&Z and council action is supported by the ordinance, there would be no problem. But if council introduced things that were not contemplated in the ordinance, there could be issues, yes.
So, in other words, if someone brought forward a project that checked all the boxes, and council doesn't have the legal right to say no, based off of someone saying I don't want that there.
So
Or
I'm
we
loath
do.
to make a general characterization like that. It depends on the circumstances, but I would say if a developer brought forth a project that complied with the ordinances in all respects, unless the ordinance itself established an exception, I would recommend, if I were asked, that council approve it.
Okay.
Just like P&Z.
So, can I say one more thing? I guess I don't mind it coming forward. I guess I don't really understand the point. And that's what I'm trying to find out. Like, what is the point in adding in the extra steps to do this if we've already outlined exactly what has to happen in the thing? So that's kind of just a rhetorical question, but I mean, I guess if someone has a good answer,
Sure.
go ahead.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I guess I'd take it beyond rhetorical, and I think it opens us up to have the practical opportunity when we have these public discussions, whether at P&Z or here, to get the public input. We don't really love to name it, but there seems to be a little bit of a trust issue, and so this would go in the vein towards reestablishing trust. I'm reminded of a couple of development projects that came through where there was discussion about the berm and privacy trees and things of that nature, and even just the variety of trees. There was nothing in the ordinance that said, developer, you must put in cedar trees versus maples. But the opportunity to discuss that with the neighborhoods impacted might inform the developer how best to serve the neighborhood that they're trying to develop into. So that, to me, is the value add to bringing back the public conversation. To me, there's a detriment to not having that public conversation, though most everything should abide by the ordinances. If something goes up that people take issue with, they just get begrudgingly stuck. And so this would assuage that. You give us the opportunity to say, hey, this is what we've got going on. They've met every checkbox. We are going to approve it. We're just letting you know. And maybe if you like a type of, if you want to have a conversation about how it's going up and just make an advisement to the developer, that hearing would be the opportunity. I know it brings back a timetable that may be prohibitive in some perception, but developers are already jumping through a measure of hoops. So this is one more thing that just needs to get done to do development. So I don't see it as a harm, and it does add that value of the public discussion about it. Though it doesn't stop them from doing valid projects the way they see fit, it enables the public to be heard, even if they don't get the trees they wanted. So I think it has huge value to bringing back that oversight, even though it's timely, or it is time consuming.
I'll see that. I can see that. Thank you.
Other thoughts?
Mr. Mayor?
Comments? Yes, Councilor Dunn.
First, Ms. Howard, thank you for explaining and re-explaining and all of your patience and knowledge. I appreciate you. When the transparency word gets thrown around or the mistrust word gets thrown around, I want to make sure that, okay, it is transparent because this has gone back and forth for years now, this conversation of downtown zoning between all the people who work to make it, the workshops that they had to build what was wanted by the citizens and business owners and all those things. Those folks who wanted to participate could participate. I guess my point is that the reason that I feel it is transparent is because it has been through that process. So all of those participants and players and professionals have worked hard to draft this checklist. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but for instance, when you want to have an event here in Cedar Falls, I know that when I want to pull an event permit, I come or I go to the website and there's a nice checklist that tells me exactly what I need to do. I love a good checklist, and I feel like we've had developers in here saying they also love a good checklist. It's not I know there's naysayers, believe me, I've heard from them. I don't think they are the majority. From what I've heard from folks, and they've said it here in this room, I believe, They just want to know what is needed. And actually, I've heard them say it saves them time and money. And sometimes I appreciate a good public comment section. But sometimes we get sometimes those, you can still meet and discuss things with people. It doesn't need to be in a public setting. I'm talking about not us, the citizens. If you want to meet with your neighbor and discuss what's going on with their building or whatever, that's up to you. But coming in and having a couple naysayers stifle progress, I don't know if that's a reason to go against what planning and zoning has recommended. And I guess that's also my main thing is we've kicked it back. I appreciate the process. I know that there's some that will say, well, the council should be the end all, say all, whatever. That's easy to say when you're the one that is the end all, say all, but there's probably a reason why there are different commissions. In fact, I'm certain there's a reason, and I appreciate that process. I appreciate those folks that sit on that commission and that board who do all the work voluntarily to help make our city go. So that's it. The word transparency, I don't want citizens to continue to think that there's some kind of, I hate that. I hate the undertone of something's wrong, and I really don't like it or appreciate it when we insinuate it to our staff. Our staff is here doing what we've directed them to do. So sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of a tone of we're insinuating that somebody on our staff is doing something wrong, and I don't appreciate that at all. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Drewer.
Well, I've been at this for quite a few years, and Dustin Ganfield hit it correctly. The planning and zoning review adds great value to the overall project, and I have seen many a time where the public input and makes the developer work with the public, and we get the best project or the better project for the value of it. And so there's a lot of value to having the P&Z review. I give them a lot of credit for making the projects even better, and I think it's a great thing, and we should definitely not have taken that review away.
Would you look also as a question to have council then as the final approval then? So they go through the step of planning and zoning and then the step of council, or would you be comfortable with having it end at the planning and zoning commission?
Just as we did before where we had P&Z review and council approval. It was great benefit, and I think it's something that should be continued.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Cyrus.
I try to go to as many planning and zoning meetings as I can. I think there is a lot of discussion between the developer and the surrounding neighborhood, and I think that's one of the ways you get the best outcome, whether it's legal at that time to turn it down. I like the recommendation of a planning and zoning board and then to come to council. I think this is just another great advantage to having planning and zoning, is to get the public together with planning and zoning before it comes to council for approval. I think it's a good idea. That's all.
For staff, I might be putting you on the spot a bit, but do we know for other cities what the general approach is, whether these kinds of plans go to their council, or is it much more common for zoning administrators, review boards to handle those? Can you say definitively?
I think there's cities that do a lot of different methods for site plan review. Some of them have go through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for larger site plans. I think that's more common. For small items, I think it's a little less common to have every item reviewed by P&Z and Council. But that's just a general characterization. I'm sure they're all over the place.
Thank you. And I'd note too, it's not every site plan in the city that gets reviewed. It's only in certain areas of the city. So it's not as if this change would then make it so that every site plan comes before council. Yes, Councilor Cruz.
Thank you. So over the, 3 years now we've been debating this, we hear this checklist that is going to magically cover every scenario in a downtown area that's 150 years old. I think there's intended consequences and unintended consequences. And there's always going to be something that a different set of eyes will look at a project and say, this isn't going to work, this is a problem. And that's why we want to have, as I use the word transparency, to see what's going on so the public can add input from their perspective, from all ages, all experiences in life. We want to have full transparency. We did have, in the process, it was 73 or 74 property owners sign a protest to this, and that's significant when you have that many people.
Point of order. It was 74 properties owned by 24 people. Not to diminish their thing.
Okay.
It's just for
Fair enough.
correct
Fair enough.
information.
But that represents a significant part of the square footage of the downtown area that would not have transparency of the public to see, right?
Yes, I understand.
I don't know if you're paying
Sorry.
attention, you're kind of talking off to the side there. But it is significant. So it's important to have public review. We have a 150-year-old city, give or take a few years, and a checklist just isn't going to cover everything. And I've had concerns from developers who hit the checklist items and still have problems getting projects developed and finished. So the checklist is not end all and be all. So
For the city attorney, if a project is turned down by zoning administrator, what's the remedy? If they believe it checks off all the boxes.
I haven't read this ordinance again recently, but I believe if it's turned down, the developer believes that's an error, then they would challenge the city's action by way of court case.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Follow up for Mr. Rogers. How do you determine if the checklist is all inclusive and covers every element and every component that is not thought of? So you're saying that you'd have to go to court to determine that the thickness of a sidewalk wasn't on the list or something. I don't know. I'm just grabbing something out of the air.
I don't understand your question, but I'm going to try to answer it anyway. I think what you're saying is not every scenario can be contemplated, but the challenge wouldn't be on that basis. The challenge would be on misapplication of the ordinance as written. That's what the challenge would be based on.
Ms. Howard, do you have something to add?
I just have a point of clarification there. The appeal would be to the Board of Adjustment, and then anybody wanting to appeal their decision would appeal to court on a zoning matter.
I did see that in the.
Is that in the ordinance, that appeal process?
Yes, yes.
There you are.
That's a state law.
Thank you.
All right, before, Mr. Mayor, before Ms. Howard sits down,
Welcome back.
wanted to catch you. So really, the only thing we're doing, they would have the same requirements to go through the checklist. What we would add is the site review by P&Z and then to come to council. That's the only thing that would change. The form of the project would stay the same. The same checklist, as you will.
Right, the ordinance, all the ordinance requirements still have to be met.
And would add the site review by planning and zoning, and then it would come to council.
That's correct.
Okay.
But something to note too, though, is at least as I understand it, if you are adding on a council review and a planning and zoning commission review, they're not just looking, we're not given the checklist to then go through the plan and say, okay, does it check the boxes? Okay, council approves. This is it adds a level of arbitrariness, I think, to, it's like, does the council feel like this is a good project? Does it feel like the neighbors want it? And that's something that no checklist can really answer for us. But the other question being, if something comes to the city as an approved, or based as a project that meets all the approvals, is it the council's best role, is it the planning and zoning commission's best role to individually call balls and strikes on every project that comes forward, or is it to allow the project to go through and then update the code to make sure that thing doesn't happen again? Do you want to try to catch everything ahead of time? So I don't see it as, it's not a right or wrong here in how we vote tonight, but it certainly does have trade-offs. And I believe I wouldn't say it's a negative change for development in the city or add a level, but it's going to add an additional burden, additional time burdens, additional costs to developers that they wouldn't have otherwise. And the potential, and I've heard it from developers, is they go to other cities instead. So just realize that that's an opportunity cost for us there if we add additional burdens onto the public. Now, again, trade-offs. There might be value to it, but just realize what that impact could be. Yes, Councilor Cruz.
If I could repeat the first couple sentences you said, you just made my point by saying that the checklist isn't the bottom line, because not everything's going to be on this checklist. And we're taking away scrutiny, transparency, oversight, whatever words you want to use, to see what other eyes can see by looking at this thing and saying, hey, we want to have review.
But isn't the transparency in the code itself, of having a clear code that says
That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make it so that planning and zoning looks at it, and then people watch what planning and zoning say. To Mr. Sire's point, when he says he watches the planning and zoning meetings and see how they deliberate or are uncertain how they deliberate, and then it comes back to us. So there's more eyes on a project. I would think a developer would want to have their project scrutinized to the nth degree if they're going to put a multi-million-dollar project up that satisfies everything in the city and not just cram it down throats.
I think that's a mischaracterization of what developers want.
That
From
they
my
want-
conversation with
they want-
developers,
they
they're
wanna-
not looking for more scrutiny. They're looking for clarity.
Clarity.
Even if that code list is 30 pages long of a checklist to meet, they would rather just know that they can meet that. Like, I've checked all this off. I've done the costs. Now when it goes to the city, it's going to be approved. I've already spent thousands of dollars on it, rather than complete the checklist and then they have to come to planning and zoning and the council for another gauntlet to run.
This is a tomato thing here in my mind.
I don't believe so.
I do believe so, because more eyes looking at a project, not just the developer's eyes and his blinders saying, I want to build this, and so on and so on. It would be helpful to the developer to have critique and say, oh, you're right, maybe I should move that door to a different place or put in a door where there's one needed. That's not.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Ganfield.
Yeah, I think take a minute. Let's just all breathe for a second. I want to point out, well, I guess one item, I think it could be somewhat arbitrary that we come back before Planning and Zoning and Council for review. Mr. Rogers, I'm going to ask you a question in a second. In regards to, for instance, a tobacco permit, I asked Mr. Rogers a while back whether we have the authority to say, no, I don't like this tobacco permit for this reason or that. And there were some parameters around that decision where he said, the council doesn't have the jurisdiction, if you will, to make that distinction. They can choose the locale, maybe, where they want permits, but they can't call balls and strikes on tobacco permitting. That's the same thing for this ordinance. We're not changing the ordinance. We're not changing the checklist. We're simply inviting in that extra opportunity. And to the tomato-potato discussion, some may call it transparency. I see that as an opportunity to have a diversity of thought and a collaboration type discussion. So I think if we couched it in those terms, instead of talking about transparency that might for some insinuate that staff is trying to do something or a developer is trying to get away with something or any of that crap, let's say it's a diversity opportunity to have a collaborative discussion to, as Councilmember DeBurr said, have the best projects for the best city in Iowa. I think that's the value add. So I would invite council members who are a little bit skeptical about this to think back to before I was on council. When this passed, it was a near split. It was a 4-3, and there were some attempts to refine some things around this character district and around the form-based zoning change. I would want us to come to a compromise, which is, I think, how we gain the most trust when we work together on something, crafting a better outcome. So I would invite any councilors that are thinking, I'm not sure that this is the right way to go. Get rid of the politicking side of it and go, hey, this is a compromise we can come to. We have a wonderful planning and zoning commission who has retained supermajority requirement for any text changes. And they've said all along with the form-based zoning that it's easy to modify in place. And yet my year and some months on council has shown me that this is nigh unto impossible to amend in place. And so the entire argumentation that said this is the right way to go because it's easy and movable, and that's a lie in my experience. So let's not make ourselves liars. Let's come to a compromise on this and say all we're doing is adding in the arbitrary discussion that brings a diversity perspective that helps us create the best products for our city. There's no harm in this. So, Mr. Rogers, the question is, Could the council say, no, we don't like it this way or that way at those hearings, or would they simply say, yes, this is in accord or not? Or if they vote no on an approvable project, we open ourselves up to lawsuit. Is that is that a clear enough question? Because the ordinance still says, here's what we need. We're just saying, hey, we want to have that public comment.
I'm trying to think of a scenario where a developer came forward, it's met all the requirements, and something happened at council or P&Z that would cause a valid reason to reject it. That's the scenario I'm trying to come up with, and I'm unable to on the spot. But the basic premise being, if there's additional comment or additional review that P&Z P&Z said they don't require it by their vote here, but if council feels that additional discussion would benefit stakeholders, there's no harm in that, as long as council polices itself and says this project really meets everything, and so I think we have to approve it.
So, Mr. Mayor, so that's my concern as you maybe mentioned already, or someone else, on the burden of the contractor to come all that way, go through the entire steps, go through review and P&Z, come to us, and if we don't monitor ourselves and we end up saying, hey, you can't do this project, after years, months, thousands of dollars of prep, and they've done everything that the ordinance says to do, and then we shut it down. That's a fear, and the cost of that is, well, the developers are saying, well, I'll just go somewhere else. I won't even risk that. I'll just go somewhere else.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Dunn.
So I just want to say that first, if there was a need for change, if we have actually let this zoning and ordinance change play out, and I thought as a part of this body there was a need to make a change, I certainly would be involved in that conversation and open to change. When we talk about compromise, there's a couple spots down where the compromise for me was when we continued to argue about parking in downtown. Then I made the motion that we get rid of the shared parking. So it's not that it's not a willingness to listen and compromise. I'm not going to lead and make decisions by fear of, well, this could happen. Yeah, it could happen. And then we can come back and we can discuss it and we can fix it if needed. Right now, we've not even let the thing play out. So I guess I am all about listening and making changes when change is needed. This has not had a chance to play out without us meddling in it since we adopted it. So that's, I just want to, it's not that I'm not open to compromise and change. It's just that it's simply when we kick something back to planning and zoning mills it around again and they kick it back, I respect them and I'm going to take their recommendation into the decision I make.
Councilor Harding and then Ganfield.
So could we not just do it like the liquor licenses and the tobacco licenses then, and have a receive and file and an update on what's going on and how they met the checklist and it comes to council? I mean, is that not something that we could do to keep it in the public eye rather than have to go to P&Z and then to council? Because that's a month, and time is money. We realize that. Not that I want to make it like, I can understand where people are saying, let's get it out in the public eye. How can we get it out in the public eye as a receiving file? Is there a way to do it more efficiently so that we're not continually adding burden to staff to then, okay, now it's approved here, now we have to prepare it for planning and zoning, all right, now we have to prepare it for council, when it's just going to be, here it is, they met the checklist, and so I guess that's my question. Is there a way that we can look at this to get it straight to council? Does it need to go to P&Z I don't know the answer. Doesn't need, if I'm going to try to compromise here and figure something out, I want to see how we can do it efficiently, more efficiently than the way it is currently.
That's not a bad idea.
Well, just for clarification, for the alcohol permits, it's not a receive and file.
You're right. We do approve it. You're correct.
Anyway.
I just meant it was on the. It doesn't go to it comes straight to council consent calendar. We can pull it and talk about it. So you're correct. Sorry.
Okay, Councilor Gamfield.
Yeah, I've lost that other train of thought, but just as a question, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it in a similar fashion. I think, though, removing planning and zoning from it discredits the expertise that they represent. Their wealth of knowledge is something that I want to rely upon more with this change. Mrs. Howard, I want to ask real quick, how long does it take to get before the zoning review board versus planning and zoning's agenda?
You mean the board?
For a developer to get a project before the board and get a yes versus the timetable that it would be to get planning and zoning?
Planning and zoning meets twice a month, so they'd be much quicker to get to the Planning and Zoning Commission than, are you talking about the Board of Adjustment?
No, the internal committee.
Zoning
Sorry.
review board?
Yeah.
As it stands today, it's reviewed by an internal.
So basically, it would add the additional time. The planning and the staff review would still occur. And I just want to clarify that we're working with the developers on making sure that they've met all the criteria in the code. And once we feel that it does, we would take it to the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. That additional time period is about a month or month and a half, depending on how the P&Z and council timelines stack up. So it just basically adds another month and a half to the review time.
Thanks for that clarification. I guess that is the cost to this shift, and I think to Councilmember Dunn's point, there's nothing that's crazy catastrophic, and I do think we are letting this play out. Obviously, it has been the law of the land for the last year, so I don't think that, there are developments happening down in this character district, so I don't think that we need to continue that rhetoric, but in this vein, I think that the thing that's missing is that opportunity for the public, and that's where I'd like to see this value add, and I think that's a compromise we can look at, but we could be in that same position here where it's some want it and some don't. So I yield.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor
I just
Burr.
want to point out when it went back to P&Z for their review, it was not a 9-0 vote against adding this amendment back in. It was a 4-5 vote. So therefore, a good share of the P&Z commissioners also thought that the review was a good idea.
Thank you.
So,
yes, Councilor Chris.
I'd like to address, and I think I've responded this comment at least 3 other times before, but some of us say we should try it and see what happens. Well, we're building structures that'll probably last 100 years. So do we build one and say, oops, we got to rip a story off of it? You can't, I can't emphasize enough to take an extra month, 6 weeks, to decide if a building that's going to stand for 100 years is appropriate. That seems, that argument to say, let's try it and see what happens, I don't, And then we use the word burden. For somebody who wants to build and not, go through the process, which is the better terminology to use, I can say they think it's a burden, but as I say, this helps to Mr. Burr's point. Planning and zoning was not unanimous. That adds a lot of credibility to the thought of having a review. So, thank you.
And we'll have some closing comments here.
Cool. Yep.
Right.
Last comment. They can only build 4 stories. It's pretty laid out. So I think the Planning and Zoning Commission put a lot of thought into this, and I'm getting used to the idea of the public looking at the input. I just want to make sure that people realize that the ordinance is already laid out. 3-4 stories, depending on where you're at. It's very specific. We're not going to end up with megalopolis, 15-story buildings down there. And we're not adding this back in if we decide to add it back in and it passes to for the council to say, no, you can't do that there. We're adding it back in so that the public's aware of what's going on, because we already said what you can and can't do there. We are not picking winners and choosing winners and losers. We're just adding in, here's what's going on. So if that's the way it's going to be, I'm more open to it. I don't want to get into, oh no, this person doesn't like your project, so even though you check the boxes, we're not going to do it, because that gets political to me. So as a transparent oversight and awareness of what's going on, I can accept possibly, but as a no, we're not going to allow this to happen in our downtown, even though you followed our rules, I don't think that's we've already stated what you can and can't do. So therefore, it's a rubber stamp of, okay, you followed the rules and go. And if it's not, then it opens us up to a lawsuit, which has already been stated. So,
Mr. Mayor, I do have a comment, if I may. To Mr. Rogers, you mentioned earlier you couldn't think of an example where somebody followed the ordinance and then wasn't allowed to build. The Quick Star at Green Hill in Maine was put out there. They hit all the buttons, retention ponds, so on. And then Quick Star changed because of public comment that filled the room. So that's a really good example in my mind that Quick Star modified their cookie cutter Quick Star gas station, convenience store, and did something to suit the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to throw that out there as a comparable.
I don't remember the precise circumstances, but I do have the sense impression from that period that public input definitely made a difference in that project.
And it developed a better Quick Star for the neighborhood.
That's subject to interpretation, but it changed.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well,
I think you'd have some neighbors who beg to differ about.
well, they didn't want, they wanted no Quick Star.
Right.
But they modified it. Okay, you were there.
Mm-hmm. I was in the trenches. Was there a comment on this side?
No.
Okay. Then I'll take the closing comment on this. Again, I don't see this as a moral question or a right or wrong question, but it's probably one of the most important decisions we'll have process-wise for this year, because we're saying how much we want to insert political oversight into what in many cases is a technical approval. So if it does pass, I would just want to ensure that both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Council keeps in mind the importance of having clear code. And that was the entire point of updating our zoning ordinances, was to provide very clear direction. So I am a little concerned that if this does pass, it'll take some of the pressure off to have clear code, and instead to say, well, we can't address everything, so we'll deal with it at council. Which is not fair to the developers, especially from one council to the next, or just changing opinions of council members. So that is a dynamic to just have in mind. But I'll leave it to the council's wisdom to make a fair choice. So with that, it's been motioned and seconded to pass the ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to establishing procedures for Planning and Zoning Commission review and City Council approval of site plans in the Downtown Character District upon its first consideration. And this does require 5 aye votes.
oops.
I think I screwed up my computer.
You can revote.
I'm stuck on a refresh, but it's not refreshing.
Okay, she's right. She screwed it up.
It says voting is now open, refresh, but it's not refreshing. Sorry, Jackie.
Stand easy, council.
Sure miss our buttons.
How are we doing, Madam Clerk? Do we need to go to a voice vote?
Turn it off or turn it back on.
I need music. Hold music.
You can just sing for us, Simon.
Pass.
There you go.
So we'll do just roll call for 2 people?
Just one.
One person? Okay, so roll call for Councilor Dunn.
Nay. All voting aye, Mr. Mayor. 5 voting aye, 2 voting nay, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that does pass on the first vote. There'll be 2 additional meetings forward for continued vote on this. So if there are questions or comments from the public, there certainly is time to do that in the next 2 meetings. With that, that takes us over to item 3, which is a public hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to eliminating the shared parking requirement in the downtown character district. Is there a motion to receive and file proof of publication? Anyone?
So move.
Moved and
Second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that does pass. And Madam Clerk, do we have any written communications filed here?
I have no written communications on file, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, ma'am. And again, Karen Howard for this section. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Okay. So this has a little bit of a history to it, so I kind of wanted to go back over the overview of past actions. There was an original petition from council in January of 22, and the commission recommended disapproval of eliminating shared parking at that time. Council also asked for an increase in the parking requirements from what was originally in the zoning ordinance, which was 0.5 spaces per bedroom. The commission recommended increasing that to 0.75 spaces based on council's request to increase that parking requirement. There was also a request to make sure that for studio apartments, if a project was all studio apartments, they would have at least 1 parking space for each unit. So the commission was supportive of increasing the parking requirement at that time. So that was the change that was made. They didn't recommend eliminating the shared parking, but they did recommend approval of increasing the parking requirement at that time to 0.75 and no less than 1 per dwelling unit. In April of 2022, the council did adopt the ordinance as recommended by the P&Z. So that is the current ordinance on the books. In August of last year, the council referred a second petition to the Planning and Zoning Commission, again to consider eliminating the shared parking requirements. After a discussion at council, as you recall, there was a lot of confusion still about the time and location standards in the new code, and in the end, the council recommended that perhaps the best action would be just to eliminate the shared parking requirements from the code. So sent that back to the commission. At that same meeting, there was also a recommendation from the council to ask the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider increasing the parking requirement for residential uses from the 0.75 that was adopted in April per bedroom to up to 1 space per bedroom, which would be back to what was previously in the downtown area. So this is at this particular public hearing then on September 28th, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended disapproval of the petition to eliminate the shared parking requirements. I think in general they felt like it hadn't had a chance to really work yet, and so they really wanted to see the shared parking to see if it did provide some additional parking during peak times in the downtown area. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions on this particular ordinance.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Howard. Before doing that, is there anyone who wishes to speak in public comment for the hearing portion? Seeing none, then I'll consider the public hearing closed and bring us over to item 3E, which is passing an ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to eliminating the shared parking requirement in the downtown character district upon its first consideration. So is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Open for council questions to Ms. Howard or discussion.
Question and slight discussion. So with the way the ordinance currently is laid out, if we eliminated shared parking altogether, we would then have to go in there and change there's 0.25 for shared, and we would have to redo that. So does that play into how number 4 is laid out, or how that affects number 4?
So we anticipated that. So the first ordinance, which was to eliminate the shared parking, would eliminate all references to shared parking in the downtown, including the 0.25 spaces. It would eliminate the definition of shared parking, would eliminate all traces of shared parking requirements in the downtown code. Then it is completely written independently of the second code amendment on the agenda. So both of them will work either way, any way you decide it, they will work together. They have to be taken in this order in order to work, but on the agenda, and that's why city clerk put them in this order.
So I guess, okay, that helps me piece it together. But if, let's say we voted both of these, or let's say number 3 fails and number 4 passes, then would that make it 1.25 spaces in some cases? It would up it from where it was, right?
So the shared parking would still be there, but it is a separate paragraph. But if what you're asking is if the effect will be 1.25 spaces, that will be correct.
Whereas currently the effect is 1 space.
Currently, the requirement, yes, if you add the two together, the 0.75 and the 0.25 spaces, it effectively is 1 space per bedroom currently.
So there could be a way that if it gets voted in correctly, that we would actually up the requirement of parking from where we were.
That's correct.
Yeah. So we have to be careful of how we think of this, because if we, and this is what I was sitting at home, like reading this over and over, if we keep the shared parking and then approve number 4, we actually, on certain buildings, will demand more parking than we've had in the past to build a building. But if we get rid of the shared parking and we approve number 4 to 1 space per bedroom, then it will be how it currently, it would be to where it's 1. So I guess that's all I'm wanting to make clear, is that we really think about how this plays out, because we could, in effect, put a higher demand on what we've ever had in the past.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just to clarify that a little further, if we vote yes on number 3, then we are and yes on number 4, then you're taking away the mandatory shared parking. If a developer wants to allow other people to park on their property, they certainly can do that, but we're taking away the required mandatory shared parking and putting us back to where we were before, where you're required to put in 1 spot
Correct.
per bedroom.
And with that, to Councilor DeVere's point, that still provides an optional shared parking. If they want to meet their 1 space requirement, if 4 passes, they could still choose to use shared parking as the way to help meet that. Correct? It doesn't kill shared parking entirely, just kills the requirement for it. Do I understand that right?
Yeah, anybody can share their parking lot. I mean, they can do it now.
So, yep, I check off my box. I meet the requirement because I'm using this shared lot, that I have agreements in place to make that happen.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
I got to clarify this because I made an amendment. I know Ms. Dunn made the, let me back up. We were first starting about shared parking and the location of the shared parking. It is stated in the code that the properties or the parking spots next to the building would be attributed to the building, which is customer parking, street parking, and up to 600 feet away. And we were deliberating at probably a couple council meetings. Then Ms. Dunn made a motion to eliminate the shared parking. Gil made a second. And then we passed that, and I did an amendment to say that if we take away shared parking, we still end up with one spot. So this 3 and 4 discussions be together, that if we eliminate the shared parking with this vote, that we end up with one spot, not, as Councilor Harding says, that we end up at 1 1/4. That was not the way it was amended and stated.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. I was just pointing out that depending on the actions we take, we could end up there. That was all my intent was.
Well,
that's it.
Okay.
Item 3 and 4 need to be debated together, not separated. The intent is to have one spot. The code currently says one spot, of which 1/4 of it can be shared. Neighboring in the street or up to 600 feet away.
Well,
The majority of us didn't like that, so we said we want to bring it into the building within 100 feet, and then came the amendment by Councilor Dunn. Then I amended that, and that was accepted in this whole process, to have one spot end up, not 0.75, because if we eliminate the shared parking with number 3, there's no guarantee that number 4 will pass. And that's the concern. Then we downsize to 0.75.
The code is
Councilor Harding?
the code is currently 0.75 with 0.25 added
Correct.
to get so
Right.
so we would have to. So to staff's point, I see why they wrote it the way they wrote it, because we have to amend the ordinance to get one parking spot. Therefore, we need number 4, but number 3 had to happen first because that will affect the total number of parking spots depending on what we decide on number 3.
But if we turn down number 4, turn down number, let's see.
Number 3.
Number 3, we are saying P&Z is denying getting rid of shared parking. We got to have 5 votes to get rid of shared parking, right?
The requirement, yeah, for shared
For
parking.
the requirement of shared parking. We're not talking about whether it's in the street or 600 feet away. That conversation disappeared. I amended it, and it was approved that if we get rid of shared parking, we end up with one spot. And if you want to go back to the recording, we can. I distinctly remember that. It was collectively together that we still end up with one spot. I know that because I amended it, and everybody, it was approved, I think unanimously, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I guess I'm not debating what you're saying is incorrect, but what I'm saying is that if we get rid of shared parking, then we still have to change the ordinance per law to get to 1. So what you're saying is correct. We just have to do 2 steps to get there by law.
Okay. Does anyone else?
You're both
So it's not
saying the
dominating.
same thing.
Yeah.
It's-
Other
Mr.
thoughts
Mayor?
or comments? Yes, Councilor Cyrus?
Yeah, no, Simon's correct, and so is Daryl. So we just need to vote on these 2, and then everything will be cool. That's all.
Okay, easy enough. We're adjourned. All right, anything else that we need to ask for questions for Ms. Howard? I'll note, we mentioned earlier that the last vote said it's like a very split vote in the planning and zoning one. As I read this one for the vote, it said Ms. Lynch made a motion to approve deleting all shared parking in the downtown district. Do you recall, was that motion to approve deleting all required shared parking downtown? Like just the requirement? And it just wasn't noted?
Yeah, that was the only thing on the
Yeah.
agenda because there's not any code that
Okay.
that is
So,
voluntary.
On
so.
that one, the motion failed with 1 aye and 7 nays. So just want to let know where the planning and zoning kind of fell on this one. It's very different than the previous vote. Okay, so anything else before we're taking a vote?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I might be a slow learner here, but Mr. Rogers, I'd like to understand if we do pass item 3 in a month and a half on its 3rd and final reading, does number 4's proposed ordinance change with red line copy become null and void because we've just enacted a new law before we edited this? Why couldn't we take these in concert? Take the eventual result that these would both accomplish should they both pass and put that as one public hearing? I mean, Why
they
did
will
we
wo-
have to separate them out again?
They will work the way they're written right now,
Okay.
regardless of which way you vote. They will
Okay.
work.
In my mind, I'm thinking on item 4, the redlined copy will be inaccurate once we vote item 3 into law in a month and a half.
That won't be the case.
Okay.
Together, right?
Okay. I'm not reading it, so I trust you.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilor Cruz.
unless somebody else wants to go.
No, go ahead.
It's also very possible, depending on the combination of the votes, that we end up with no shared parking and .75 required.
Yes, that certainly could be a decision
Okay.
that council makes.
Mr. Mayor, I want to make a motion to amend this so that if we turn down shared parking, that we still have one parking spot per bedroom. End result. And then the developer, well, I'll just wait.
I'll need it
No.
reduced to writing.
That's what the next ordinance is.
It's only a sentence.
So I need it reduced to writing to make it clear. Because it's a pretty complicated thing you're asking.
Well, Jackie can write this as I speak. I make a motion so that if we turn down shared parking, we still end up with one parking spot per bedroom.
But that's going to be voted on. I don't think it's appropriate because we're going to be
Then
voting on that for item 4.
Number 4 would be deleted then. It would be null and void to Dustin's point.
Well, point of order, I guess, to clarify.
Yes.
Can we put the passing of ordinance item 3E, can that become dependent upon item 4E? I think we've done that in some ordinance changes in the past, or at least resolutions. So if I'm misremembering that, let me know. But I guess I'm leaning on you, Mr. Rogers. Can we make 3E dependent upon the passage of 4E?
It would be the reverse, I think, if if the order's important, then 4 would depend upon what happens with 3, would it not? I'm having trouble figuring out what the concern is. You can approve or deny 3 and then take up 4. And if 4 needs to be amended to get to a certain number of bedrooms, couldn't you make
Mr. Rogers, I can answer that if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
As I stated, Mr. Rogers, that it's entirely possible to end up with less parking by how we vote on this than what we currently have. Right now, we have a total of 1, and I want to maintain 1, and I amended Ms. Dunn's motion of getting rid of shared parking, and it was approved, that we end up with 1. So collectively, these two need to be debated together. If we eliminate shared parking, as my original amendment to the referral last summer was, that we end up with 1, and it was approved. So these are taken up together.
Council can overrule me on this with the majority, but the way I'm seeing it, where item 4 says public hearing on proposed amendments relative to increasing residential parking requirements in the downtown character district to 1 parking space per bedroom is going to answer that. And we should vote on it at that time.
And if we need to amend it, then we can amend
Right,
it.
in item 4.
I agree. I see how it works this way, the clearest in my brain. So
I'm going to call that motion out of order then. Is there anything else, final discussion before going to a vote on this item? Okay, so what's on the floor is, go back to 3 here. Ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to eliminating the shared parking requirement in the downtown character district upon its first consideration. It's been motioned and seconded. It requires a roll call, or excuse me, a roll call vote with 5 ayes required.
Mr. Mayor, I'll still need to do the voice thing.
Okay, so I'll take the other, okay, and we have also Councilmember DeBur.
It's green.
Okay, Councilmember Dunn, a voice?
Nay.
Okay.
3 voting aye, 4 voting nay, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so that fails. So the shared parking requirements still would remain in effect, which, yes.
still have 2 more readings.
No, but no, because it died.
Oh, never mind. You are correct. I stand corrected.
Thank you. Once in a while it happens. So with that, then it takes us over to item 4, which is the public hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to increasing residential parking requirements in the downtown character district to 1 parking space per bedroom. Is there a motion to receive and file approve of publication?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
But
Okay.
you don't need a motion to keep what you already have.
Right, it's null and void. Right, Mr. Rogers? We don't debate number 4 because we just eliminated and died getting rid of shared parking.
No, it's
Yes. Otherwise, you want to vote for 1 1/4?
That's what's on the floor, is to vote for 1
You
1/4.
could.
And the option is to
Okay.
vote it down.
Maybe I could just help clarify
Please.
a little bit, because they aren't exactly the same. Shared parking requirement, yes, it was 0.25 spaces, but that 0.25 spaces could have been on-site, it could have been counted as the on-street parking or within 600 feet. So it provided some flexibility. It also, you didn't have to share your parking the entire time. So there is a distinction between the shared parking requirements and just the requirement for parking. So there is a difference between required and shared parking.
Okay. And so that'll be your staff
Hopefully that's clearer
comments
than
here.
mud, but so the ordinance that's on the table then is to increase the required parking, which has to be on site, or could be on a property that's directly abutting it. So if you had, a property that was right next door that had extra parking, you could make an arrangement. So I think that's the only accommodation for, like, if you had a tight site and you were required to put a certain number of parking spaces on there, there is an allowance for the required parking to be on an abutting site.
Okay, so with that, just for the sake of following the agenda correctly, that was just to address the question that it is a separate item as a point of order. And then now looking at Part 4B, are there any written communications filed?
I have no written communications on file, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that then takes us now to staff comment. So if there's anything additional you'd like to add, feel free.
Apologize for jumping the gun there. So the Planning and Zoning Commission did consider increasing the required parking on site to 1 space per bedroom and recommended against that at their September 28th meeting. So recommended denial.
All right, and with that, do we have any public comments tonight? Anyone wish to speak in the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, then I'll consider the public hearing closed and take us over to Part 4E, which is passing an ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of the Code of Ordinances relative to increasing residential parking requirements in the downtown character district to 1 parking space per bedroom upon its first consideration. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, open for council discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
if I could get clarification, if this is turned down, let me back up. Karen, could you repeat the part where you says if this is approved, then we end up with 1 spot, parking on site?
The required parking would be increased from 0.75 spaces per bedroom up to 1 space per bedroom. And since the shared parking was not eliminated, then it would, on top of that would be another 0.25 spaces.
So then, by eliminating the proposal to remove shared parking, the existing rules of parking in the street next to the building and up to 600 feet away apply? Because that's not been removed.
Right, so the shared parking requirements would remain the same as they are
Okay.
currently in the code.
Then, to get clarity, when you said adjacent property could be used for the on-site, is across the street considered adjacent, or does it have to be within that city block to be adjacent?
It has to be directly abutting or across the alley.
Across the alley, but not across the street?
Right.
Okay. For the required 0.75 right now?
Right.
And we're looking at going to 1?
Right.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Councilor.
Yeah, when you talk about the same abutting property, so if I own the 2 properties, I could count that my same parking for both of my 2 properties, even though it's really only enough for 1?
No,
Because
the
I could
total
count
would-
it for both properties.
No, the total would have to accommodate both properties, whatever was the uses on both properties. So for the number of residential units on both properties, you'd have to meet the ordinance requirement for both. So in other words, you couldn't say, give away your parking that was required for your property.
But that rule that they talked about before where you got to count the city parking or the city street as your parking still stands, because that was in the shared parking.
So the shared parking, yes, and I think that the shared parking was intended to be sort of a replacement for the visitor parking requirement, which in the CBD overlay, the visitor parking requirement was allowed to count the parking on the street in front of the building as meeting their visitor parking. So I think that was the reason why the shared parking allowed the on-street parking to count.
Well, since many of the downtown merchants have talked about wanting more parking downtown, by increasing this, isn't that going to help alleviate some of the parking problem by making any new development actually have more instead of less parking required?
Well, it wouldn't be shared with the public.
I don't care about the shared.
I mean, the public, it would be more parking for that project, but it wouldn't necessarily be publicly available parking. So it wouldn't help alleviate the parking problem
Well,
downtown.
it would help alleviate it because then the overflow or the added parking that they may need at that residential because of visitors or number of occupants in the building aren't spilling over into the other available merchants area.
Yeah, I guess it would be a matter of, I mean, the whole impetus from the original ordinance was trying to follow what the parking study showed was the parking for residential was oversupplied. And I think we've done a number of parking counts since that ordinance was passed. So I think the goal of that was to say, the parking consultant said, basically you're requiring more parking for residential than what you need for residential. And that was, so the ordinance that was changed when we changed the downtown code was in response to the parking study.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Schultz.
So is this aimed, in your opinion, more to development, or would this be on remodeling of existing? Because is it, where are these spots gonna come from? Realistically.
So on a remodel project, there's certain allowances for existing buildings. Like if somebody just wanted to take their upper floor of a Main Street building, you wouldn't be required because there's no space on that property for the parking to be met there. So there are certain exemptions that are written into the ordinance. But yes, that is a concern, I think, on development in the downtown is if you require too much parking, which is kind of basically what the parking study said, if you require too much more parking than what is needed, you may prevent development from occurring downtown, particularly on tight sites.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilor Dunn.
And also, just a comment, I believe we kind of have an example of that. If you think of, and this again has been brought up by some of the folks that are sitting up here, with the state and second area, that was under the old code, and we've had discussions about how that the parking that was required for that development, some folks have observed that parking lot is oftentimes not fully utilized, and so I just want to point that out. That was under the old code, and so we've said that, and we obviously can't. People who live downtown have the right to park wherever they choose to park legally, because I know that's been a comment as well, that sometimes they think they're parking on State Street. If they're doing so legally, that's their prerogative. I'm just saying that is in my mind, when we think about over requirements and you walk by that site at whatever time of day you choose to, whatever day of the week, and it's oftentimes, I don't know if it's even half full sometimes. I mean, it may be half full, but it's like and we've also talked about how even though we use the term free parking, that there is no such thing as free parking. That obviously costs money for that developer to secure that land, to purchase that concrete, maintain it, and all the things. So, I mean, there is an example of under the old code of what some of us may feel is over requirement of parking.
Thank you. Any closing comments here? Seeing none, then it's been moved and seconded to pass the ordinance amending Chapter 26 zoning of Code of Ordinances relative to increasing residential parking requirements in the downtown character district to 1 parking space per bedroom upon its first consideration. And I'll note too, just for housekeeping, this one was from Planning and Zoning. Motion was denied with 1 aye and 7 nays. So again, it was very lopsided. So moved and seconded and requires a roll call vote. And I'm allowing the Councilmember Dunn to do the voice vote only because she can't see what's on the screen for the rest of us. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair, would it? Don't look. Councilor
Nay.
Dunn?
3 voting aye and 4 voting nay, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So that does fail also, and will not be brought back forward since it was a failure to move forward. Long night. That takes us out of our special order of business and takes us over to the consent calendar. Well, these items will be acted upon by a voice vote on a single motion without separate discussion, unless someone from the council or public requests that a specific item be considered separately, and we're very happy to pull individual items out if you'd like to discuss them. Does any council member request to pull an item 5 through 9? Okay, does anyone from the public request to pull an item from the agenda 5 through 9? Okay, seeing none, then is there a motion to approve items 5 through 9?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, those do pass then. And that takes us over to the resolution calendar where these items will be acted upon by a roll call vote on a single motion without separate discussion, unless someone from the council requests that a specific item be considered separately. So does any council member request to pull an item from 11, since 10 is administrative, from 11 through 22? Seeing none.
21, Mr. Mayor.
Say again?
21.
You wish to pull 21? Okay. So we'll pull item 21 for separate discussion. And does anyone from the public request to pull an item from 10 or 11 through 22 with the exception of 21? Yes, sir. Number 13. Okay. Okay, so we'll pull item 13 and 21. And with that, is there a motion to approve all those items from 10 to 22 with the exception of 13 and 21?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded and requires a roll call vote. Councilor Dunn?
Aye.
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So I'll go back to item 13, which is a resolution approving and authorizing execution of an agreement for public services with Cedar Valley Youth Soccer Association relative to providing opportunities for youth soccer. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Yes, sir. I'd like to come forward. Name and address for the record, please. And you have 5 minutes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Tom Hersman, 1122 West 10th Street. I am the president of the Cedar Valley Soccer Club. So I just wanted to thank Mayor, Council, and the city for your previous support. Our organization is in its 30th year, and we have some great things going on at the complex. We have over 2,000 kids playing soccer in the Cedar Valley, 16 communities represented. So again, just want to thank you for your support of soccer in the Cedar Valley.
Okay, thank you. And you got to see the entire rest of our hearings process at the same time. Lucky you. So anyone else wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Cyrus.
I'd like to thank the Cedar Valley Club They do a huge benefit to our community. I was actually, believe it or not, a soccer referee for many years, and enjoyed it and joined the competition that the kids get. And I think it's very important that soccer is a great sport, and I want to thank them for all the things that they do. That's all.
Excellent, thank you. I was at an event I guess last week, where some young people were asked what they thought the biggest challenge in America was, and each of them, with not being in the room at the same time but individually answering, all said social media. And it really got me to thinking about how in our community we need more activities like youth soccer that help kids get out and get engaged with other people in a friendly, competitive environment and away from their screens. So thank you very much for your part in helping to make that happen, and looking for future opportunities for that as well. So thank you. Anything else from council? It's been moved and seconded for the resolution approving and authorizing execution for the agreement for public services with Cedar Valley Youth Soccer Association for providing opportunities for youth soccer. Moved and seconded and requires a roll call vote. Counselor Dunn?
Aye.
Did it go? It's not
Counselor
very,
Greer?
it's not working. Maybe you
I'll take a
broke,
voice.
yours broke over here.
You got it.
Yes.
You got it.
Okay, we're
I
good.
know.
All right.
See the red?
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that then takes us over to 21, which is the resolution setting April 3rd as the date of the public hearing on the maximum levy rate. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. And I just want to be clear that for what we can talk about tonight is just the date itself for that maximum levy rate and whether this resolution should be approved or not. So, Councilmember Cruz?
Yes, thank you. The only reason I wanted to say something here is that I likely will not be here April 3rd, and I just want to reiterate I am not willing to accept any increase in our max over the 1149. So
Okay,
thank you.
So, any other comments on item 21?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Out of-
Councilmember Canfield.
Out of curiosity, what's the earliest date we could set one and still meet notification requirements should we happen to have a special meeting for this initiative?
Well, if we want something before that, it's no less than 10, no more than 20. So if you figure the earliest we can get it in is setting a new date Wednesday, I'll say, they need 3 days notice, 3 days notice. So that's Thursday, and if it's 10 days, you're not going to get much sooner than April 3rd anyway. That's why we kind of talked about that a little bit. We thought that's why the mayor mentioned the better option is, if we want more discussion, is to have a special meeting maybe in between, like a work session where we don't have those publication requirements, and then do it.
Okay, thanks.
So it's been moved and seconded to set April 3rd, 2023 as the date of the public hearing on the maximum levy rate and requires a roll call vote.
There's no ratings on speed.
Councilor Dunn?
Aye. All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that takes us out of the resolution calendar and over to bills and claims. Is there a motion to approve bills and claims
So
for March
moved.
20th?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion from council? Any from the public? Okay, moved and seconded. Requires a roll call vote. Councilor Dunn?
Aye.
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And that does pass then and brings us over to council updates and announcements. Do we have any for tonight? Seeing none, then over to council referrals. I didn't see any in the packet, but any that we want to bring
Mayor.
forward tonight? Councilmember Cruz.
Because the shared parking elimination was defeated, we revert back, or we still have the current shared parking allowed to be on the street next to a building, which is, in my mind, public parking. I'd like to make a referral that we do not, or remove the allowance of street parking to be counted as the shared parking for a development.
To remove the allowance of street parking
Street parking to be used as shared parking for a development.
used for development. And so this would require basically a petition back to Planning and Zoning Commission. Okay.
We start over where we left off back last summer when we diverted away from the discussion.
So the motion on the floor is a petition to the Planning and Zoning Commission to remove the allowance of street parking for use for developmental considerations for parking. Does that make sense?
It's for their mandatory count, isn't it?
For mandatory count?
right.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Open for council discussion about whether this merits going to planning and zoning.
Should have already gone.
Mr. Mayor, just a comment. I guess we've kind of said this already. Our discussion on where shared parking could be allowed was diverted when we had a motion to eliminate shared parking. So this was, in a sense, tabled and postponed. So we're just bringing back the discussion of where the shared parking can be. And I want to separate this out from the other component, which was up to 600 feet away. So I'm just talking about street parking.
Okay. So any others before taking a vote on the referral? Okay, so moved and seconded to refer or petition planning and zoning to remove the allowance of street parking for determination of mandatory parking in new developments or developments. If I captured that right. Moved and seconded, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so show of hands for aye.
Your aye.
Aye.
3, 4, 5, and nay? 1, 2. Okay, so that will be referred back to planning and zoning as a petition. And any other referrals tonight?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Cruz.
Unless anybody else has one. Last council meeting, we were talking about the valuation for the industrial park land, and it was explained to us that the older industrial park was developed at $1.50 a square foot cost to put in place to be shovel-ready. The newer development was $1.72, and then market value now is currently $1.84. I'd like to have a referral to discuss the actual price that we want to charge for lots in the industrial park.
Okay. And industrial park. Would that make sense to go to FBO then?
Mm-hmm.
So that's an incentive for Mr. Gaines. Is that typically handled by FBO, or is that more an economic development discussion? We don't have an economic
I would say
development.
it'd probably be economic development.
Okay. So with that being the case, since it's economic development, I eventually would like to see like an economic development committee, a standing committee, because it is different from our internal operations, like the details of it. So if council's okay with that, I'll send it to the committee of the whole.
Sure.
Okay. Eventually we'll get an
We need
economic
a
development.
second.
Second.
Yeah, so moved and seconded. Any discussion needed?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
As I stated at last council meeting, if we have land valued less than what the going rate is that the public can buy anywhere, we're pitting against the citizen, the private citizen that has land that's for sale, and it diminishes their ability to sell their own property at fair market value.
Okay. So this is a reason to have that discussion.
To have the discussion whether we do $1.84 or appraised value, whichever is higher. And then we have the element that all the lots are not equal. Some are goofy shaped, different locations. They could very well be appraised at less than $1.84 and sell those off at fair market value. So that's part of the discussion.
Okay. Great. So is that clear for council? What's looking to happen in committee of the whole? All right. So moved and seconded. All in favor of this, sending this to committee of the whole, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so that does pass, and that'll go to committee of the whole for future discussion. Any other referrals tonight? Seeing none, then we will now take a vote to shift over to executive session, which will occur.
moved.
Oh, I haven't done it yet.
Oh.
So, and this will be basically the end of this meeting in here. We're going to go to executive session if it's approved, in the back room. We'll come out just for a moment. There'll be no votes taken publicly tonight. So this would basically conclude the meeting, but we still have to come back and formally close out the meeting. You're welcome to stay. You're going to be bored, but we're not going to hang out. Is there a motion to move to executive session to annually discuss the city administrator's performance pursuant to Iowa Code 21.51I and City Code Section 21, Act 217?
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Requires a roll call vote. And,
Aye.
Thank you, Councilor Dunn.
All voting aye, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So we are adjourned to executive session. Thank you for coming tonight, everybody.
And whatever we're.